Imagine this, a billionaire walks into his own wedding, music playing, lights flashing, cameras everywhere. But suddenly, he stops. Why? Because in the corner, he sees his 5-year-old daughter wiping tables, clearing plates. Not dressed like a guest, but in a maid's uniform. At first, he thinks he must be imagining it. But as he gets closer, the brutal truth hits him. Someone told his little girl she's not part of this family, that she could only stay at her father's wedding if she worked like staff. How could anyone make a child feel so invisible? And what will this father do when the cruel truth hiding in plain sight is finally exposed? This story will break your heart, and then put it back together again. Red Heart. But before we dive in, comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of a grand house on the outskirts of Chicago. The beams cut across the polished oak floors, leaving long golden stripes that stretched toward the staircase. Everything in the mansion looked meticulously arranged. Family portraits lined the hallway in perfect symmetry, crystal vases of fresh flowers stood at exact angles, and not a book or cushion was out of place. This was the world of Adam Reynolds, a man whose name was printed in financial magazines more often than it was spoken in his own home. A self-made millionaire, Adam controlled every detail of his life the way he managed his investments, precise, measured, unyielding. Since the loss of his wife years ago, he had replaced grief with routine, and routine with control. Yet on this particular morning, as he climbed the staircase holding a carefully wrapped box, there was a flicker of unease in his chest. Inside that box was a plush gray rabbit, the kind his 5-year-old daughter Emma had once stopped to stare at in a toy catalog. She hadn't asked for it, Emma rarely asked for anything, but Adam had noticed the way her tiny hand lingered on the page before she quickly turned it, as if she didn't deserve to want it. Now he stood at her door, tie already perfectly knotted, watch set precisely to schedule. He lifted his hand and tapped twice on the wood, sharp, exact knocks. From inside came the faint sound of humming, Mary's familiar voice, the nanny who had raised Emma more closely than he ever had. "Come in," Mary called gently. The room was bathed in soft morning light. Yellow curtains swayed in the breeze from a slightly open window. At a small white desk sat Emma, her dark hair woven neatly into 2 braids, a navy dress pressed smooth across her knees. She looked so much like her mother that Adam's chest tightened. "Good morning, Dad," Emma said, her voice polite, almost rehearsed. Adam stepped forward, shoes sinking into the thick carpet. "Good morning, sweetheart," he answered, extending the package. Emma took it carefully, her small fingers unwrapping the paper with deliberate patience. When the rabbit appeared, its soft fur catching the light, her hands trembled. She held it on her lap, stroking it lightly but never pulling it close. "Thank you," she whispered without looking at him. Adam forced a smile. "I remembered you liked it." Mary gave a nod of approval, though there was a weight in her expression. Emma's shoulders were drawn tight, as if even joy required permission. "I came to tell you something," Adam continued, his tone controlled. "Tomorrow I'm getting married. I want you there. Mary will help you get ready. The car will arrive at 10. Emma froze. Her eyes lifted, not to his face, but just past his shoulder. "Will Mom be there too?" she asked softly. The question sliced through him like glass. For a moment, Adam couldn't breathe. Memories pressed against him, hospital walls, a pale face, a final promise whispered in his ear. He swallowed hard and forced his voice steady. "She'll be watching, in her own way," he managed. Emma nodded once, accepting the answer with the same quiet resignation she accepted everything. She lowered her gaze, stroking the rabbit's fur over and over, the motion almost mechanical. Adam checked his watch, 7:50. A conference call awaited him at 8:30. He turned toward the door, but Mary's quiet voice stopped him. "She wants to see the world," she said softly, glancing at Emma. "But she doesn't know how to ask you." Adam's eyes lingered on his daughter, her small frame, her cautious posture, the way she carried silence like armor. He saw something of himself in her, and for the first time, it unsettled him. "She'll be at the wedding," he said firmly, almost as if reassuring himself. "It's time." The Reynolds estate was no longer quiet. By mid-afternoon the house buzzed with a restless energy that only a wedding could create. Florists hurried through the halls carrying buckets of white roses, decorators balanced on ladders stringing fairy lights across archways, and delivery vans pulled up one after another at the circular driveway. What had always been a fortress of order was now a carefully orchestrated storm. Adam walked through the front entrance, loosening his tie as he took in the scene. Everywhere he looked, something was being polished, arranged, or rehearsed. He liked control, but this wasn't his kind of control, it belonged to Vanessa. She had orchestrated every last detail, from the ivory linens down to the monogrammed champagne flutes. In the sitting room, Vanessa sat regally in a velvet chair while her stylist worked at perfecting her honey blonde curls. She glanced into the ornate mirror and caught Adam's reflection standing in the doorway. "Darling," she said smoothly, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who had practiced it for years. "How was your morning meeting?" Adam's eyes flicked to the stylist's hands as they pinned another curl into place. "It wasn't a meeting," he said simply. "I went to see Emma." The stylist's hands faltered for just a beat before continuing. Vanessa's smile in the mirror stiffened slightly, then stretched wider. "Oh," she said, adjusting the diamond bracelet at her wrist. "And how is she?" "She'll be at the wedding tomorrow," Adam said, moving toward the window to look at the rows of chairs being set up outside. "I've already arranged for her car." For a fraction of a second, something hard flickered across Vanessa's face, but she smoothed it away instantly, her voice lilting as though nothing was wrong. "Of course," she replied. "But perhaps," she paused, lifting her chin delicately, "perhaps keep her away from the spotlight. She's so sensitive, Adam. These big events can overwhelm a child." Adam's brow furrowed slightly, though his eyes remained fixed on the rows of chairs. "Mary will be with her," he said, voice flat, unwilling to discuss it further. "Perfect," Vanessa replied quickly, dismissing the matter with a graceful wave of her hand. Now, she turned her attention back to her stylist. "A little more volume, don't you think?" Adam's phone buzzed in his pocket, messages from his assistant about the rehearsal dinner. He slipped from the room without another word, leaving Vanessa's reflection in the mirror smiling back at itself. When the door closed behind him, Vanessa's smile vanished. She rose from her chair, skirts rustling, and crossed the hall toward the makeshift command center where the wedding planner sat buried in seating charts. "There's a mistake," Vanessa said lightly, tapping one manicured finger against the guest list. "Emma Reynolds, that name shouldn't be there." The planner frowned. "But Mr. Reynolds specifically confirmed." "There was a miscommunication," Vanessa interrupted, her voice silk over steel. "The poor girl will be too fragile for all this chaos. We'll find somewhere else for her to wait." The planner hesitated, then drew a neat line through Emma's name. Vanessa's smile returned, sweet and flawless. "Good," she said softly. "Now, let's talk about the head table." The morning of the wedding rose crisp and golden, sunlight spilling across the sprawling Reynolds estate. From the driveway, workers bustled with ladders and crates, rushing to set every detail into place. White roses and baby's breath hung in garlands along the archway, crystal glasses sparkled on linen-covered tables, and the air smelled of perfume and polish. It was meant to be perfect, every angle staged for the photographs that would appear in society columns. Far from the grandeur of the main entrance, a black town car rolled quietly to a stop near a side service door. Inside sat Emma, her small hands clutching the hem of her pale pink dress, smoothing it over and over as though trying to make herself invisible. Beside her, Mary leaned close, whispering reassurance. "Just breathe like the butterflies, sweetheart. In and out." Emma obeyed, taking an exaggerated breath that made Mary smile in spite of her worry. When the door opened, one of Vanessa's assistants appeared, young, polished, her expression cool and businesslike. This way, she said briskly. We can't use the main entrance right now. Cameras are being set up. She led them through a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. At the checkpoint, a uniformed guard frowned at his digital tablet. Names? He asked without looking up. Emma Reynolds and Mary Collins, the assistant supplied. The guard scrolled. Not showing anyone by those names. He raised his brow, skeptical. Before Mary could protest, a junior planner wearing a headset rushed forward. I'll handle this, she said quickly, ushering them toward a small side room. There's been a mix-up with the list. Please, wait here just a moment while I sort it out. The room was little more than storage, metal chairs stacked in the corner, cardboard boxes piled along the wall, a single light buzzing overhead. Mary helped Emma sit carefully so her dress wouldn't wrinkle. I'll be right back, she promised softly. Don't move, sweetheart. Emma nodded solemnly, folding her hands in her lap, the stuffed rabbit from yesterday tucked tightly against her chest. The door closed, and Mary's footsteps faded down the hallway. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. The muffled sound of laughter, music rehearsals, and clinking glasses drifted in from beyond the walls. Emma sat perfectly still, waiting, the rabbit pressed under her chin. At last the door creaked open. Vanessa stood there in her silk robe, her wedding gown hidden behind layers of protective fabric. The hall light framed her in an almost angelic glow, yet her smile was too sharp, too polished. Oh, poor thing, she cooed. There's been such a mix-up. But I have a solution. She stepped inside, carrying something draped across her arm, a black uniform dress, much too big for a child. You can stay, Vanessa said, her tone syrupy sweet. But only if you help. You'll be part of the team today. Doesn't that sound nice? Emma stared at the uniform, then at Vanessa's face. She thought about the long ride home to the quiet house, missing her father's wedding. Slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. Good girl. Vanessa patted her head with manicured nails. Change into this. Someone will show you what to do. The door closed again, leaving Emma clutching the oversized uniform, her pink dress crumpled in her lap. Emma struggled with the stiff black fabric, the uniform meant for an adult catering staffer. The sleeves hung far past her wrists, the collar scratched her neck, and the hem dragged along the dusty floor. She looked like a child swallowed by someone else's life. Still, she folded her pink dress neatly on the chair, pressing it down with her small hand as if promising it she'd be back. Moments later, the door opened again and a young woman in a headset hurried in. She glanced at Emma's awkwardly fitted outfit and gave a quick, sympathetic smile, though her eyes were filled with pity. This way, she whispered. Emma followed, her sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floors. They wound through hallways lined with silver carts stacked with glasses, napkins, and trays of food. Finally, they emerged into the grand reception hall, where chandeliers glittered above rows of perfectly arranged tables. Every surface gleamed. Every flower seemed sculpted from perfection itself. The woman leaned down to Emma's level. Just stay by this station, honey. If anyone asks, you're helping. Hand out napkins, smile, and keep quiet. Got it? Emma nodded, gripping the edge of the linen table like an anchor. She felt out of place, a doll in a game she didn't understand. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored suits began to drift in, laughter floating like perfume. None of them noticed the little girl in the oversized black uniform. To them, she was invisible, another part of the machinery that made their luxury seamless. From across the hall, Vanessa glided past, radiant in her gown now revealed, layers of white silk embroidered with pearls. Flashbulbs burst as photographers circled her, capturing every angle of her practiced smile. But her gaze flicked once toward Emma, a brief, assessing glance that carried both warning and satisfaction. Mary appeared finally, breathless, her hair slightly out of place from arguing. She spotted Emma instantly, her eyes widening at the sight of the uniform. Rushing over, she crouched low, whispering fiercely, "What is this? Why are you dressed like this?" Emma's lip trembled. She said, "I could stay if I helped." Mary's throat tightened. She wanted to rip off the uniform, snatch Emma, and storm out. But as she looked around, she saw security guards by every door, assistants carrying clipboards, and Vanessa's watchful eyes still trained in their direction. This wasn't their world, it was Vanessa's stage. Mary swallowed hard and pressed Emma's hands. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just do as they say for now. I'm right here." Emma nodded again, but tears shimmered at the corners of her eyes. She turned back to the table, setting napkins with deliberate care, pretending not to hear the laughter and whispers swirling all around her. And so, as the guests toasted the bride with champagne and violin music rose to fill the hall, the billionaire's little daughter, meant to sit proudly at her father's side, stood in the shadows, dressed as a servant at her own father's wedding. The evening stretched on like a slow parade of wealth. Guests clinked their crystal glasses, laughter bouncing off the marble walls, while waiters moved swiftly, filling plates and topping champagne. Emma stood at her station, her tiny hands arranging napkins in neat little stacks. Each fold felt heavier than the last, as though every crease pressed her further into invisibility. Mary hovered close by, torn between anger and helplessness. She tried to comfort Emma with a smile, but her own heart ached. She had raised her daughter to believe she was special, precious, yet here they were, surrounded by people who treated her like nothing more than an inconvenience. Every so often, Emma's wide eyes drifted across the room, searching for her father. Daniel, tall and handsome in his tuxedo, moved gracefully from group to group, shaking hands and laughing like the perfect host. His eyes sparkled when he looked at Vanessa, lifting her hand as though she were a queen. But when his gaze swept past Emma, there was no pause, no flicker of recognition. To him, she seemed to blend into the shadows like the rest of the staff. Emma's chest tightened. She remembered the nights he used to tuck her in, whispering stories about castles and adventures. She remembered how his eyes once softened just for her. Now, those eyes were for someone else, Vanessa, the bride who had stolen both the man and the home she thought she could count on. At one point, a group of wealthy women passed by her table. Their voices were sharp, coated with perfume and superiority. "Is that a child working here?" one of them chuckled. Another leaned closer, lowering her voice but not enough. "Probably some relative from the poor side. How unfortunate." The laughter burned Emma's ears. She pressed her hands flat against the table to stop them from trembling. She wanted to scream, to shout that she wasn't a servant, that this was her father's wedding too. But her throat refused to release the words. Mary's nails dug into her palms. She wanted to lash out, to shield Emma from every cruel whisper. Yet the room was a battlefield where money spoke louder than love, and she knew they were outnumbered. The violin music swelled, announcing the first dance. Daniel took Vanessa's hand, guiding her into the center of the floor. Their movements were graceful, rehearsed, dazzling under the golden lights. Cameras flashed, capturing the perfect couple's perfect moment. Emma clutched a napkin so tightly it tore in her fist. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she realized, this wasn't just her father's wedding. It was the moment he chose his new life, one where she didn't belong. Mary knelt beside her, brushing the hair from her face. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you don't have to prove anything to them. You're mine. You're enough." But Emma's tears slipped free anyway, glistening under the chandelier as the music soared. For the first time, she felt not just forgotten, but erased. And yet, in that quiet pain, something small and fierce began to stir inside her. The music slowed, and applause rippled through the hall as Daniel spun Vanessa in one last twirl. Guests clapped politely, their jeweled hands sparkling as much as the chandeliers above them. It was a picture-perfect scene, the kind that would end up in glossy magazines, filed under love and luxury. But for Emma, standing at the edge of the room, it felt like the final stroke that sealed her place outside the frame. She lowered her eyes, folding napkins again though no one had asked her to. Her little fingers moved automatically, a way to keep from shaking. Her chest felt hollow, a weight pressing down that she couldn't name. She wanted to disappear, to slip beneath the polished floorboards and never come back. Mary watched her daughter crumble, every second carving deeper cracks into her heart. She had tried to swallow her pride for Emma's sake, telling herself it was just one night, that maybe Daniel would notice his child standing in the crowd. But he hadn't, not once. Not during the vows, not during the dinner, not during the dance. He had looked everywhere except at Emma. Suddenly, Emma lifted her chin. Her big, tear-filled eyes fixed on the dance floor, on her father's smile. Something inside her shifted. She realized she had two choices: let this night break her completely, or rise from it. And though her hands trembled, though her voice was small, her heart whispered, "I will not be erased." She stepped away from the table. Mary startled. "Emma, where are you going?" she whispered, reaching for her daughter's arm. Emma shook her head softly. "Mama, I just need him to see me. One time." The words carried the fragile bravery of a child who still believed love could be called back, like a dog from a distance. Mary's throat tightened. She wanted to stop her, to protect her from another wound, but she saw the fire in Emma's eyes and let her go. The hall seemed to grow louder as Emma moved forward. Guests continued laughing, their voices a blur. She weaved between glittering gowns and polished shoes, her small frame almost invisible against the grandeur. Yet with each step, she felt taller, as if her pain had given her height. Finally, she reached the edge of the dance floor. Daniel and Vanessa were still smiling, lost in their perfect night. Emma's heart pounded like a drum. She opened her mouth, once, twice, before sound finally broke free. "Daddy." The single word cut through the music, sharp as glass. Heads turned. A ripple of whispers passed through the crowd. Daniel froze mid-step, his hand still resting on Vanessa's waist. His smile faltered as he looked down at the little girl standing just a few feet away. Emma's cheeks were wet, but her eyes glowed with something deeper than sadness. "Daddy," she whispered again, this time trembling, "it's me." The room fell into silence. Vanessa stiffened, her painted smile breaking. Daniel's face turned pale, as though the world had suddenly tilted beneath him. And in that silence, every guest could see what Emma had always known, that beneath the champagne and the music, beneath the glitter of wealth, there was a truth that could no longer be hidden. The little girl who had been pushed aside now stood at the center of it all, forcing the man who had tried to erase her to face what he had left behind. For a heartbeat the ballroom forgot how to breathe. The quartet's bow hung in the air, half a note left unplayed. Champagne shivered in glasses. Camera flashes stuttered and died. Daniel turned, still holding Vanessa at the waist, and saw his daughter standing at the edge of the dance floor, drowned in a black uniform 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up and slipping, the hem dragging like a shadow. A napkin corner clung to her fist. Her cheeks were wet. Her eyes were bright and impossibly brave. "Daddy," Emma said again, smaller now, as if the first word had used up all the courage she had. Vanessa's hand tightened on Daniel's tuxedo, a dainty vice. "Sweetheart," she chimed, smiling with every tooth. "We've had such a big day, haven't we? Why don't we?" Daniel let go of her. He crossed the polished floor in 3 long strides and dropped to a knee so fast the joint cracked. The tuxedo he'd chosen with a tailor's precision didn't matter, the cameras didn't matter, the carefully arranged world didn't matter. All he saw was the child who'd once fallen asleep on his chest to the rhythm of his heartbeat and who now stood dressed like someone hired to clean up her father's celebration. "Hey," he said, voice low, hands lifted so she could see them coming. "I'm here." Up close he could see the detail people miss from a distance, the sugar dust on her sleeve, the faint red pressure line around her wrist where someone had cinched the cuff, a smear of chocolate at her temple she hadn't dared wipe away. Her breath hitched, once, twice. She didn't reach for him. She was waiting for rules. "Why are you wearing this?" he asked, forcing calm into every syllable. "Who gave it to you?" Emma's gaze flicked toward the glittering arch where photographers hovered, then toward Vanessa, one quick, fearful glance, and snapped back to his bow tie. She swallowed. She said. "I could stay if I helped," she whispered. "I wasn't in the list. I shouldn't be in the pictures." The words were small. The impact was not. Somewhere behind him, a guest let out a soft, shocked "oh." Mary reached them, breathless, cheeks flushed with fury. She crouched on Emma's other side, one arm around the little girl's shoulders. "They led us to a storage room," she said, voice shaking with the effort to keep it quiet. "Then someone came with a uniform. I went to find the planner. When I came back," her stare speared the dais. "This." Vanessa floated closer, the train of her gown whispering across the floor. She kept her smile, but her eyes had the cool of cut glass. "Daniel," she murmured, pitching her voice for the onlookers, the poor thing was overwhelmed. "She wanted to help, didn't you, darling?" She didn't wait for an answer. "We'll get her changed, it's all a misunderstanding. Let's not make a scene." A scene. As if Emma's humiliation were a coffee stain to be dabbed away. Daniel stood slowly. Something like static climbed the back of his neck. He looked at the nearest event staffer. "Where's Kent?" he asked, the head of operations, a former hotel manager who knew every camera angle and back hallway in the place. "Security office, sir," the man said, startled. "Good." Daniel's tone had changed, gone quiet, flatter. Not cold, exactly. Determined. He lifted his jacket from the back of a chair and wrapped it around Emma's shoulders until she disappeared in its length. She flinched at the sudden heat of it, then melted just enough to let it hold her. "Come with me," he told her. "To Mary, you too." To the concierge hovering at the door, "Hold the band for 10. Vanessa stepped into his path. "Daniel, please. People are watching." "Then let them watch me be a father," he said without looking at her, and the dull roar of whispers swelled like a tide. They moved through a side corridor lined with framed black and white photos of simpler parties from another century. Emma's sneakers squeaked. She walked with careful steps, the way children do when they aren't sure if the floor is allowed to take their weight. Halfway down the hall, she tugged at his sleeve. "If I'm good," she said to the zipper of his jacket, as if repeating instructions from a handbook, "maybe next time I can stay longer." Daniel stopped walking. The words found a place under his ribs and drove in deep. He bent, pressing his forehead to hers for the space of one breath. "There isn't a version of this where you earn your place," he said, the truth tasting like a new language. "It's yours." Kent was waiting outside a door marked staff only, tie loosened, tablet in hand. He took in the child in uniform, Mary's white-knuckled grip on a clutch, Daniel's face. "Sir." "I want eyes," Daniel said. Side entrance. Service corridor. Storage rooms. Time window from 7:30 a.m. until now. And audio. He palmed the access panel and ushered them into a compact room stacked with monitors. The air smelled of coffee gone stale and electronics warmed past their comfort. Kent moved fast, fingers flying. Boxes sprang to life on a wall of screens, angles of parking lot, kitchen pass, hallway traffic, the discreet door where VIPs slipped in and out unnoticed. Daniel felt Emma's hand find his. He squeezed once, anchor and promise. "There," Kent said, isolating a frame, a junior planner leading a small figure and a woman in through the side door. The feed jumped to a storage room, metal chairs, boxes, a single bare bulb. Emma sat on a folding chair, the pink skirt of her dress spread, a stuffed rabbit perched in her lap. Mary stood, arguing, then leaving with a last look over her shoulder. Audio hissed, Kent rode the gain. Footsteps. The door opened. Vanessa, hair in a silk wrap, robe cinched at the waist, stepped into the frame as if it were a mark taped on the floor. She held a black dress across her arm, the uniform Emma was wearing now. Daniel felt Mary go rigid at his side. Emma's fingers dug into his. The audio cleared. Vanessa's voice, bright and benevolent, filled the small room. There's been such a mix-up with the seating, sweetheart. But I have a way you can stay. We always need helpers. On screen, Emma nodded, small and careful. Vanessa handed her the uniform. The moment stretched as the little girl stood, cradling the fabric as if it might bite. Then, Vanessa turned to the doorway, half in shadow, thinking she was out of earshot. The brightness slid off her face like a mask set down. Her voice dropped, almost conversational. We don't need a walking reminder of the past in the photos, she said. Let the staff keep her busy. It wasn't shouted cruelty. It was worse, tidy, efficient erasure spoken like a note to self. Mary made a sound that wasn't a word. Daniel tasted copper, like he'd bitten his tongue. He wanted to put his fist through the monitor and found his fingers steady on the console instead. Run it again, he said. Kent did. Vanessa's sentence played a second time, then a third, each repetition sanding away any plausible excuse until only the truth remained. Another angle flashed up, Emma in the black dress, sleeves rolled, hem dragging, being led to a busing station by a harried server who never thought to question what didn't belong. Cut to the ballroom, Daniel on the dais, a practiced smile aimed at a future he'd been trying to script, while 30 feet away his daughter methodically wiped plates in her borrowed skin of invisibility. He pressed his palm flat against the console until plastic creaked. When he loosened his hand, the imprint of his lifelines remained, pale and precise. Kent cleared his throat. Sir, do you want me to handle anything? Yes, Daniel said. His voice had the unhurried clarity of a man who has finally selected one course from a map of wrong turns. Lock the photo op down for 5 minutes. Tell the band to hold. Ask the photographer to stay where he is. And I need the ballroom doors opened when I say opened. Kent nodded and moved to the door. Mary's hand hovered at Emma's hair, smoothing what could not be smoothed. What now? She asked, the words frayed with hope and fear. Daniel turned from the screens to his daughter. Now, he said, kneeling again so his eyes were level with hers, we stop pretending you don't belong. Emma blinked. Will it be loud? She asked, honest and practical in the way of children who have already heard too many slammed doors. It might, he admitted. But I'll be loud first. He took off his cufflinks, slid them into his pocket, then loosened his bow tie with a tug that felt like opening a window. He stood and held out his hand. Emma hesitated for half a heartbeat, then placed her small, sticky palm in his. He folded his fingers around it, felt the shape of her trust, and understood with embarrassing clarity that this was the only thing he needed to carry. They stepped back into the corridor. The quartet on the other side of the wall had begun a restless trill, waiting music. Voices rose and fell. Somewhere, a champagne cork gave up with a pop. Daniel's shoes were too shiny for the hallway's scuffed runner, and he was absurdly grateful for the mismatch. Perfection had not saved him. The scuffs might. Halfway to the ballroom, Emma tugged again. He stopped. She pointed at a mirrored sconce. In its reflection, she saw herself, a small girl in a man's jacket and a black uniform, eyes red, hair out of its braids. She looked at Daniel, terrified she had ruined something that could not be fixed. He shrugged off the jacket, knelt, and wrapped it around her properly this time, tucking the collar under her chin, smoothing the shoulders as if she were the only guest who mattered. You are not a helper tonight, he said. You are my daughter. Even if I cry? She asked. Especially if you cry. Mary pressed a hand to her mouth. At the threshold, Kent waited with an earpiece, attention split between Daniel and the controlled chaos inside. "On your cue, sir." Daniel exhaled. He remembered a hospital room painted in quiet colors, a tired woman with laughing eyes, Nora, lifting his hand to her lips and making him promise to build a life big enough for the child they'd made. He had built something big. He had forgotten who it was for. "Open the doors," he said. The heavy panels swung wide on well-oiled hinges. Light spilled out like applause. Conversations broke, then stuttered. Heads turned. Cameras pivoted. Somewhere near the dais, Vanessa tightened her grip on her bouquet until petals snapped. Daniel stepped through with Emma's hand in his, and the music, for a moment, had the good sense to hush. The ballroom inhaled as the doors swung open. Conversation thinned to a thread. The quartet's violinist lowered his bow, unsure whether to play or pray. In the sudden hush, Daniel walked in holding Emma's hand, his loosened bow tie hanging like a flag of surrender and change. They didn't rush. Each step set its own tempo. Emma's sneakers squeaked once on the marble and echoed like a bell. He led her past the rows of linen-draped tables and the glittering thicket of crystal, past guests who couldn't stop staring at the child half-wrapped in a man's jacket and a staff uniform that didn't belong to her. At the edge of the dance floor, a mic waited on its stand, meant for toasts about perfect love and golden futures. Daniel lifted it free, tested it with a tap, then glanced down at Emma as if asking permission. She squeezed his fingers. He faced the room. "Good evening," he said, voice steady. "I owe you an introduction I should have made years ago." A ripple moved through the room, curiosity, discomfort, something like relief. "This is my daughter," he said. "Her name is Emma Reynolds. She belongs in every part of my life. She belongs in every picture." The sentence hung there, simple and immovable. Near the dais, Vanessa recovered her smile with professional speed and glided forward on a cloud of silk. "How sweet," she trilled, one hand outstretched toward Emma without quite touching her. She was only trying to help. "We've had a little confusion with the schedule." "We didn't have confusion," Daniel said, still calm. "We had a decision." He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. "I've seen the footage from the side entrance and the storage room." A murmur rolled the length of the hall. "My daughter doesn't wear a uniform to be allowed into her father's life." Color drained from Vanessa's face, then flared back in two high spots. "Daniel, the guests are adults," he said. "And adults can handle the truth." He turned slightly, eyes finding the head of catering. "Mr. Lopez?" The catering chief, broad-shouldered, flower dust still on his cuff, stepped forward. "Sir." "Two things," Daniel said. "First, someone please retrieve a dress for my daughter, the one she arrived in, or anything clean and comfortable. Second, no member of staff is to take instruction from anyone but you, Kent, or me for the rest of the night. If that creates a problem, I'll solve it." "Yes, sir." Lopez gestured to a server, who took off at a jog toward the corridor. Daniel crouched to Emma's height, bringing the mic down with him so he didn't loom. "Do you want to change?" he asked gently. "Or do you want to stay with me while they find your dress?" Emma looked at the crowd, the camera lenses blinking, the jeweled eyes, the sea of faces, and then back at her father. The jacket swallowed her shoulders, but her chin tipped up a fraction. "I'll stay," she whispered. "Then we'll stay," he said, as if that settled the physics of the room. From the second row, a woman in a caterer's coat cleared her throat. She was small, with quick hands and a smudge of cocoa at her wrist. "Mr. Reynolds," she called, careful, respectful. "I'm Camille." "Pastry." Her gaze moved to Emma, softened. "She helped me polish plates earlier. She did a careful job." The compliment landed like a blanket over cold shoulders. "I have a spare cardigan in the back. It's clean, if she wants it while we wait." Emma's fingers tightened in Daniel's. He nodded once. Thank you, Camille. The pastry chef slipped away. Vanessa, left with no script that fit, tried a different one. You're tired, she told Emma brightly. Let's get you some cake. Emma flinched. Daniel straightened. Stop, he said to Vanessa, not unkindly and not loudly, and yet it carried. There will be no more arranging how my daughter appears. Not by you. Not by any list. He looked past her to the photographer, who stood frozen behind his camera. Ethan, he called, and the man jumped. Don't pack up. Keep shooting. The photographer recovered, lifting his camera as if grateful for instructions that made sense. Vanessa's voice dropped to a hiss meant for Daniel alone. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Yes, he said. It looks like a father choosing his child. A server hurried back with Emma's pink dress folded over his arms. Behind him, Camille returned with a soft gray cardigan, the sleeves neatly rolled. Mary appeared at Emma's side, relief wetting her lashes. Let's change, sweetheart, she murmured. Daniel knelt to unbutton the stiff black uniform cuffs himself, fingers gentler than they had been in years. He worked slowly so Emma could watch every motion and not be startled. Mary and Camille formed a little human curtain with 2 linen napkins held like wings. In less than a minute, the black uniform pooled at their feet, and the pale pink dress bloomed back into view. Camille slipped the cardigan on last, tugged the sleeves to just the right length, and gave Emma a conspirator's wink. Better, Mary breathed. Perfect, Daniel said, and meant it. He rose, handed the microphone to Kent without breaking eye contact with his daughter, and then did the simplest thing he could think to do, he lifted Emma to his hip. She fit there as if she'd been made for the space, a truth his body remembered before his mind had dared to believe it. Her small hands found his shoulders. The room exhaled. He turned them toward the flower arch the planner had fought wars over. Ethan, Daniel called again, voice lighter now, the arch. Let's go. Cameras clicked in reflex as he walked. Guests parted in a quiet wave, the way they part for a bride, except this procession was not rehearsed, not choreographed, not polished. It was stubbornly, brilliantly human. At the arch, he set Emma on the low platform and stepped beside her. She blinked up at the lights, awed despite the night. Daniel brushed a stray curl behind her ear, then faced the photographer. Center frame, he said. Where she belongs. Ethan's hands moved on instinct, aperture, shutter, breath, then the shutter clacked in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Emma's first, shy smile sparked. It wasn't the careful social smile she'd learned for strangers. It was smaller, truer. The room, jaded, jeweled, seasoned on scandal, leaned in. Something in the air shifted. From the edge of the floor, Vanessa stood with her bouquet lowered, the ivory petals bruising under her grip. For a long breath she didn't speak. When she finally did, the polish had thinned. You're humiliating me, she said. In front of everyone. I didn't do this to you, Daniel replied, not harsh, simply precise. You did it when you decided my daughter was an optics problem to be managed. He held Vanessa's gaze and let the next sentence seal it. The reception is over for you. Kent will have a car brought around. A scatter of shocked murmurs. Someone near the bar sucked in a gasp they couldn't swallow. Vanessa flinched, then set her shoulders. You'll regret this, she said, but the room had already moved on without her. She turned, gathering silk and pride, and walked toward the side hall, her train dragging a white line across the floor like chalk. The quartet, unmoored and waiting, looked to Daniel. He nodded once. They picked up a gentle melody, not triumphal, not mournful. Something in a major key that made space for breath. Emma tugged his lapel. Can we take one with Miss Camille? She asked, carefully, as if photographs were permissions to be earned. Daniel smiled, surprised by how easy it felt. We absolutely can. He beckoned to the pastry chef, who startled and shook her head, then surrendered to Emma's small, insistent wave. Camille stepped in, still smelling faintly of vanilla and warm sugar, hands awkward until Emma slipped her own into one and stilled them both. Ethan tilted the lens. Click. Another frame, Mary, pulled in by Emma's other hand, the four of them under the arch, imperfect and right. After the photos, Daniel carried Emma down from the platform but didn't set her on the floor. He turned back to the room one last time. "I won't be taking any more congratulations tonight," he said, kind but final. "But if you'd like to meet my daughter, you're welcome to say hello to her first." It wasn't a rebuke so much as a new rule spoken into being. And to everyone's surprise, it worked. People came, carefully, respectfully. A board member with grandchildren presented a coin he said was lucky. A neighbor with paint on his cuff offered to bring over a storybook he thought she'd like. A violinist crouched down between numbers and let Emma pluck one tentative string. It thrummed like a secret through her bones. By the time the line thinned and the music settled into the soft edges of evening, the worst edges of the night had worn down. Emma's eyes were heavy. Daniel felt her weight shift the way a parent learns to read weather. He lowered his mouth to her hair. "Home?" he asked. She nodded into his collar. He didn't look back at the perfectly staged cake that would never be cut, or the head table that would never be sat. He didn't need to. He had the only piece of the night that mattered pressed against his heart, arms looped around his neck. As he carried Emma toward the side corridor, Camille jogged after them with a white bakery box tied in pink string. "For later," she said, a little out of breath. "One vanilla, extra frosting." Emma lifted her head just enough to accept the box with both hands, solemn as a ceremony. "Thank you, Miss Camille," she whispered. "I liked your sugar." Camille's eyes glossed. "Come by the shop. We'll make something just for you." Daniel paused long enough to meet Camille's gaze. "Thank you," he said, and somehow the two words felt like the start of an honest language. They reached the corridor. Kent stood waiting, an elevator held, a route cleared, 1,000 unasked-for protections in place. Daniel shifted Emma to one arm, shook Kent's hand with the other. "Shut it down," he said quietly. "Pay everyone. Make sure they get home. And," he hesitated only a moment, "send the vendors a note, we'll do something beautiful here again, but for different reasons." "Yes, sir," Kent said, and for the first time that night, he smiled. In the elevator, Emma rested her cheek against Daniel's shoulder. The bakery box sat carefully on her lap, pink string looped around her small wrist like a bracelet. As the doors slid closed, their reflections met, a man with his tie undone and a girl in a too-big cardigan, both looking like they'd just stepped out of a storm and found the air afterwards better than they remembered. "Daddy," she murmured, half asleep already. Do I get to be in pictures tomorrow?" He kissed her hair, the answer easy and absolute. "Every single one." The city slid past in bands of light as the town car pulled away from the estate, street lamps smearing into gold, traffic signals blinking their quiet orders, windows stitched with the blue of television glow. In the back seat, Emma sagged into Daniel's side without quite falling asleep, her cheek warm through the wool of his jacket, one hand maintaining a solemn grip on the bakery box Camille had pressed into her arms. The pink string was looped around her wrist like a promise not to lose it. Mary sat opposite, hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched. She didn't speak until they crossed the river and the skyline opened like a jagged crown. "Thank you," she said at last, voice thin with all the words she'd swallowed that night. Daniel looked up from Emma's hair. "For what?" "For seeing her," Mary said. "For not asking her to disappear." He nodded once. "She's not going back to being invisible." The resolution felt clean in his mouth, the kind you don't have to say twice. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over a contact he hadn't used for anything more than logistics in years. When Mrs. Collins's name, Mary's last name, filled the screen, he realized what he meant to ask and didn't hesitate. "Tomorrow," he said, could you pack Emma's things from the house? Everything. I'll send a car for you and the boxes. And, he glanced at the sleeping child, at the soft lift and fall of her shoulders. Help me make my place feel like hers. Like home. Mary's shoulders dropped, relief making her look suddenly years younger. I'll start at sunrise. They didn't speak again until the elevator chimed open into Daniel's penthouse, a sleek expanse of glass and steel perched above the city. The space was immaculate and airless. Art hung in tidy grids. A grand piano sat like a sculpture nobody dared touch. The place smelled faintly of lemon oil and nothing else. Emma lifted her head as Daniel crossed the threshold, her eyes glassy with exhaustion and curiosity. Is this your castle? She asked, and the absence of wonder in her voice made his heart kick. It's ours, he said, the word landing with a surprising solidity. If you want it. She blinked, considering. Then she nodded, a small, solemn decree. He carried her down the hall, past the office that had been a machine for deals and signatures, past the guest room designed for executives who appreciated thread count but not warmth. He laid her on his bed instead, on sheets that crinkled like paper because no one had slept in them the way a child sleeps, diagonal, heedless, honest. He slid off her shoes, loosened the cardigan's buttons, and tucked the duvet to her chin. The bakery box stayed under her arm like a second heartbeat. Milk, he whispered. She nodded without opening her eyes. In the kitchen, he stood in a wash of cold stainless steel and silence, feeling a little ridiculous in a tuxedo with his bow tie hanging loose while he fumbled for a saucepan. He burned the first pot, turned the flame down, and tried again, stirring carefully until the milk steamed and wore a breath of nutmeg he found at the back of a drawer. He brought it to the bedroom in a thin porcelain cup that had only ever served espresso to men who closed deals. Tonight it held warmth. Emma sipped, two hands wrapped around the cup like a campfire. Thank you, she mumbled, and her eyelids drifted shut. Sleep, he said. I'll be right here. He meant it. He dragged an armchair to the foot of the bed and sank into it, the tuxedo finally feeling like what it was, costume and armor, and useless now. In the quiet, the night's adrenaline ebbed, pain pooling in its place. He let it. He thought of a hospital room painted the wrong kind of happy yellow. He thought of Nora, hair in messy braids, eyes bright even when her body betrayed her, lifting his hand to her mouth and making him promise what he'd been so sure he was keeping by building walls. Protect her. He had mistaken fortress for shelter. He'd mistaken distance for care. The house was too still. He stood, restless, and started opening drawers he hadn't touched in years. In the office safe, behind a lithograph that had impressed a banker once, he found what he hadn't let himself look for, a thick envelope, the edges furred with time. He slid out a photograph. Nora, 8 months pregnant, barefoot in their old kitchen, wearing one of his shirts, laughing at something he couldn't remember now. Sunlight flared in one corner of the Polaroid like it had been trying to get in on the joke. He carried the photo down the hall to a silver frame that had hung empty for longer than he cared to admit. He opened the back, slid the picture inside, and set it on the console table at the height of a 5-year-old's gaze. Then he pulled a magnet off the refrigerator, found a pad of paper near the takeout menus, and wrote 2 words in neat, engineer-straight handwriting. Welcome home. He taped the note to the stainless steel door, exactly at the height of small eyes. By then his bones remembered being 40-something and wrung out. He returned to the bedroom, kicked off his shoes, and let the armchair have him. He woke to a weight on his shins. Emma was kneeling on the cushion between his knees, hair exploded into soft chaos, cardigan slipping off one shoulder. She was holding the Polaroid in both hands like it might crack if she breathed too hard. She has my hair, she said, reverent and matter-of-fact. He cleared his throat. You have her laugh, he said, and, to his surprise, it didn't feel like breaking to say it. She slid off the chair and ghosted down the hall on bare feet. He followed and found her in the kitchen, where the note was now carefully peeled from the fridge and pressed to her chest. She closed her eyes as if absorbing it through skin. "Do we get to keep this?" she asked without looking up. "As long as you want," he said. "We can tape it back up, or, you can put it wherever you want." "Here," she declared, and smoothed the tape again as if the refrigerator itself needed to hear it. They ate breakfast on a white tablecloth he spread in a square of sunlight on the floor, because the towering dining table felt like a boardroom and he wanted to bring everything down to a child's height. His first attempt at pancakes turned into a rubbery omelette, his second attempt at scrambled eggs was worse. Emma cackled, a real, unguarded sound that startled them both. "You're bad at this," she said, gleeful. "Catastrophic," he agreed, and poured cereal into 2 bowls with the solemnity of a ceremony. He sliced oranges into crescents because he could do that with precision, and she arranged them into a sun around her bowl because she could do that with joy. They ate, the city humming 20 floors below, sunlight climbing the wall like a tide. When she finished, Emma stood and drifted toward the piano. She rested one finger on a single key and pressed. The note floated out, clear, unnecessary, perfect. She didn't press another. The intercom buzzed. Daniel frowned. "Yes. Mr. Reynolds," came the doorman's voice. "A courier from Butter and Bloom Bakery. Says it's urgent." Half a minute later, a white box tied with soft pink twine sat on the counter. A sugar flower, pale as a whisper, perched on top. There was a handwritten note tucked beneath the string. "For Emma, no aprons required. See." Emma's face lit like a small sunrise. "Miss Camille," she said, already tugging at the twine. "After lunch," Daniel said, automatically, and then, catching himself, softened. "Or, we can have a party now." She shook her head with the certainty of a monarch. "Real parties are after meals." She set the box back down, palms flat, waiting for his agreement. "After lunch, then," he said, wondering how it was that a child could make rules feel like freedom. He put the box in the refrigerator below the welcome home note and looked around his too-clean kitchen with new eyes. He saw all the places where life could be loosened, the empty shelf that could learn the weight of picture books, the sterile counter that could tolerate a jar of crayons, the piano that should suffer sticky fingers and not mind. "Would you like to see where your room will be?" he asked. Emma slipped her hand into his without ceremony, as if she'd been doing it every morning for years. He took her to the office and, with no more ceremony than commitment, began dismantling it. He rolled the leather chair into the hall. He pushed the glass desk against the wall. He opened windows that had been shut for soundproof calls and let the city in. "We can paint," he said, aware he sounded inexperienced and strangely proud of it. "Any color. Or 2. Or stars." "Yellow," she said instantly. "Like the note. And foxes." She glanced at the bakery box in the other room, then at him, slightly wary of asking for too much. "Yellow and foxes," he said. "Done." He pulled out his phone again. This time he called a contractor he trusted, a woman who'd once built playhouses for clients with more money than imagination. "It's Daniel," he said when she picked up. "I need a room transformed. Today if possible. Small person specifications. Budget is yes." He hung up to find Emma watching him with frank curiosity. "What?" he asked, smiling despite himself. "You can call people and make things," she observed. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes it takes listening." She considered this and nodded as if filing it next to other truths, like gravity, or how much milk to pour before cereal. By late morning, Mary arrived with a suitcase and the first of many boxes. Emma ran to her, bakery box temporarily abandoned. They hugged, then set to work like a small moving crew, Mary unpacking clothes into drawers, Daniel unpacking art supplies into a basket, Emma arranging her stuffed rabbit on the window ledge where it could watch the sky. When the doorbell chimed again, it was a florist, sent by no one Daniel had called, delivering a vase of wildflowers that looked unreasonably alive for a city bouquet. There was no card. He set them on the console table beneath Nora's photo. The flowers made the photograph look less like a shrine and more like a place at the table. Lunch was grilled cheese, the one thing Daniel could make without setting off alarms, and tomato soup from a can poured into bowls like they were something rare. Emma swung her legs under the stool and ate as if each bite contributed to the foundation of a house you could actually live in. When the plates were pushed aside, Daniel nodded at the refrigerator. "Party?" he asked. She slid down, opened the door, and retrieved the bakery box with the care of a jeweler. He cut the cupcake in half with a steak knife because it was there, and they ate on the balcony with the city spread below like a shifting quilt. Frosting kissed Emma's nose. She licked it without shame, then captured his startled chuckle on her disposable camera, one he hadn't realized Mary had packed until she lifted it like a tiny reporter. The picture clicked and hummed, film winding. "What are you taking?" he asked. "You laughing," she said. "So I know how to do it again." In the afternoon, while Emma napped in a sunstripe with the rabbit under her chin, Daniel stood in the doorway and watched the gentle rise and fall of her back. The house sounded different already, a soft wheeze from a hall vent he'd never noticed, the faint creak of shelves accepting the weight of books, the ghost of a melody he didn't recognize stuck in his head, probably the quartet resolving itself into memory. His phone buzzed with a cluster of messages, board members, investors, society editors smelling a story. He turned the screen face down. He wrote an email to Kent instead, "Close everything out. Full pay, plus overtime. Bring whoever wants it by for leftover flowers. Tell Ethan to send proofs of the arch. The ones with Emma center frame." Then, without the flourish of resolution music or a speech to an audience, he sat at the kitchen island and began a list. Not the kind he'd built his career on, aggressive timelines and targets, but a different kind of ledger, school visit. Saturday mornings at Butter and Bloom. Yellow paint. Tiny piano bench. Picture frames at her height. Learn 3 breakfasts. Photos everywhere. He added one more line, then underlined it twice, never again make her earn her place. When Emma woke, the apartment was different in small, undeniable ways. A fox blanket Mary produced from a box lay across the back of the sofa. The grand piano's lid was open. The silver frame in the hall no longer held emptiness. And on the refrigerator door, at the exact height of a 5-year-old's eyes, a note waited like a lighthouse, "Welcome home." Emma padded into the kitchen, hair sleep mussed, socks whispering against the floor. She looked from the note to Daniel, then to the sunlight gathering in the corner. "Tomorrow," she said, in the tone of someone booking a future, "can we go to Miss Camille's? And, somewhere with flowers?" He thought of a bench in the botanic garden he had avoided for half a decade. He thought of Nora with her camera, crouched to get the angle of a droplet on a petal. He thought of how you can love 2 people at once, in different tenses, and call both of those loves by the same honest name. "Yes," he said. "We can do both." Emma considered this, then stretched her arms up toward him, not a question, a certainty. He scooped her up, breathing in the sweetness of shampoo and sugar. The city pulsed below them, indifferent and immense, and for once he didn't feel small in it. He felt exactly the right size for the thing he was meant to hold. Sunday broke open like a promise, sharp blue sky, early light knifing between buildings, the city sounding softer than usual. Daniel woke before the alarm and found Emma sprawled across her new yellow room, a fox blanket half kicked to the floor, the stuffed rabbit face down like it had fainted from too much adventure. He stood in the doorway a moment and let the sight hammer a nail through the middle of his old life and hang this one there instead. They started with pancakes. He burned 2 and ate both so she wouldn't have to. On the third he managed a respectable circle, golden in the middle and only a little embarrassed at the edges. When he set it in front of her, Emma looked at him like he'd pulled a coin from behind her ear. "Teach me next time," she said around a mouthful. "Deal," he said. We'll ruin them together. They dressed like conspirators, her in a sunshine cardigan, him in a shirt that didn't care if it got paint on it, and took a cab to the botanic garden Nora had loved. Daniel had avoided its gates for 5 years, grief had hung a do not enter sign on the archway of every memory. Today he walked through with a small hand in his and found the sign wasn't there anymore. The place was waking up, gardeners misting beds of coneflower, a kid chasing his own shadow along the path, an elderly couple holding hands like teenagers. Daniel pointed things out he remembered from the days he trailed Nora and her camera, bee-balm, black-eyed Susans, milkweed pods fat with secrets. Emma listened like a student, not talking much, her eyes everywhere at once. Near the Rose Allée there was a bench with a discreet brass plaque. For the ones we loved and what they left with us. He didn't know who'd paid for it or why the wording hit like a soft punch, but he sat. Emma climbed up beside him and put the rabbit in the space between them so the three of them made a row. Your mom used to hunt light here, he said. Said the world will tell you where it wants to be seen if you're patient. Emma considered this. Like when I waited last night, she said, small brow furrowing. So you could see me. He swallowed. Exactly like that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a disposable camera he'd picked up on the walk over. Want to hunt some light of your own? She took it like a wand, serious and delighted. First she photographed their joined hands on the bench, his large, hers small, the rabbit's ear trapped between them like a ribbon. Then the underside of a petal, because no one looks there. Then his face when he wasn't ready, because now you are. They stayed until the sun climbed high and the shadows turned blunt. On the way out, Emma stopped at a patch of wildflowers planted in a deliberate mess. They don't care about lines, she observed, awed. Turns out most beautiful things don't, he said. Butter and bloom smelled like Saturdays. Camille looked up from boxing lemon bars, cocoa on her sleeve, and grinned without reservation. There you are, she said, as if they were late to something good. She came around the counter and crouched to Emma's height. I have 2 frosting bags and only 1 set of hands. Think you can help? Emma's answering smile showed all her small, brave teeth. Minutes later she was on a stool in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, piping buttercream roses that looked like weather but tasted like heaven. Daniel stood useless and happy, washing bowls on command, stealing glances he didn't try to hide. Hold your wrist steady, Camille coached gently. The swirl does the work if you let it. I'm learning that, Daniel said, and wasn't sure if he meant frosting or fatherhood. Afterward, Camille slid a small cake onto the counter. For home, she said, tying a ribbon around the box. Then, quieter, careful, you did right last night. It wasn't absolution, it was acknowledgement, and somehow it saved him more than sympathy could. He nodded. I'm sorry my right was late, he said. We're all late to something that matters, she replied. Just don't miss it twice. By afternoon, the penthouse had stopped trying to be a museum and started pretending to be a house. Mary had transformed chaos into categories, crayons in a clear jar that looked like candy, picture books marching across a low shelf, tiny socks making a rainbow in a drawer. A contractor named Tessa arrived with drop cloths and a laugh that turned the hallway into a workshop. Emma solemnly chose a paint swatch called Lemon Cloud and pressed fox decals to the wall by the window with the concentration of a surgeon. Out on the balcony, Camille returned with a flat of herbs and flowers balanced on her hip. Beginner friendly, she said. They'll forgive you if you forget once. Basil, mint, rosemary. Marigold soldiering in a row. A stubborn little daisy whose tag read simply, loves sun, hates rules. They filled planters together, Daniel learning the weight of soil, Emma patting it like a sleepy dog, Mary misting everything as if blessing it. When they finished, Emma stepped back, hands on her hips, cheeks freckled with earth. It's ours, she declared, then amended, magnanimous, and also the bees. Inside, Daniel's phone buzzed itself into a small tantrum. The outside world had finally found their number. He answered one call, his board chair, and said in a tone that brooked no debate, "I'm taking a week. We'll restructure the calendar I pretended was sacred. You can tell the street, we invest in what we center. I'm centering my kid." He sent Kent a single-line text, "Release a statement, apologize to staff, bonus everyone, send flowers to the ones who stayed late to clean up our mess, ours, not theirs." He declined a morning show request with 2 words, "No comment." The only audience he needed was playing with a watering can. At dusk, the city flicked on one window at a time like a slow constellation. Mary made spaghetti because some rituals are international. They ate at the low table in the living room on mismatched plates and called it a feast. After, Daniel carried Emma's cake to the balcony and stuck a single candle in the center. "What's the party?" Emma asked, serious as a judge. He looked at her and said the thing the day had earned, "For the first day we were brave." They didn't make a wish so much as say a truth together, "We live here now." Emma went inside and wrote it in careful block letters, then taped it beneath the welcome home note on the refrigerator, aligning the edges with a precision that made him laugh. It felt like planting a flag. Later, when the dishes were an honest mess in the sink and the fox blanket was a cape and Mary had declared bedtime by royal decree, Daniel tucked Emma into the soft center of the yellow room. He sat on the edge of the bed and found the apology he hadn't known how to make when it mattered most. "I'm sorry I made you small to fit the space I understood," he said. "You never have to earn your place again. Not with me." Emma studied his face like a painting she intended to keep. "Will Mama be proud?" she asked, not tentative, curious, like a scientist. He thought of Nora's laugh in the Polaroid, of her steady hands, of the way she had trusted him with a job he'd mistaken for architecture when it was actually gardening. "Yes," he said, and felt it land true. "And if I forget, you can remind me." She nodded, satisfied, and yawned so wide the room yawned back. He kissed her forehead. "Center frame," he whispered, a secret handshake made of words. In the hall, he stopped at the console and straightened the silver frame. On the opposite wall he hung a fresh print Kent had couriered over, the photo from the flower arch, Emma in the middle, cardigan sleeves a little too long, button slightly off, Daniel at her side, bow tie loosened, posture softened into protection instead of performance, Mary close, one hand on Emma's shoulder, a blur of Camille in the background, flower on her cuff, smiling like someone who knows endings are usually beginnings wearing new clothes. He stood between the 2 images, past and present, until the line connecting them felt less like a wound and more like a stitch. Before he turned in, he made a list on the kitchen whiteboard in black marker, each item with a box he intended to fill with check marks and cereal crumbs. Monday, school tours. Wednesday, plant more marigolds. Friday, pancakes, her turn to flip. Saturday, butter and bloom class. Every day, photos, center frame. He capped the marker, turned off the lights, and listened to the apartment settle into the small noises of a place that is finally occupied, the thrum of the fridge, a pipe knocking like a neighbor, the distant breath of the city beyond glass. Somewhere down the hall, Emma's disposable camera clicked, one last shot she must have saved for when he wasn't looking. "What did you take?" he called softly. "Your face when you look at me," she called back, drifting toward sleep. "So I know it's real." He leaned his head against the cool window and smiled, not the practiced one he'd worn for years, but the unphotogenic kind that happens when no one's watching. He didn't need to see the picture to know what it looked like. He'd wear that expression every morning until it left muscle memory. Inside the yellow room, a small girl exhaled into dreaming. On the balcony, a stubborn Daisy decided to live. On the refrigerator, 2 pieces of paper told the truest story in the house. "Welcome home. We live here now." And on the wall, in every frame that mattered from this day forward, Emma stood where she belonged, center frame. And that was their story, a father who almost lost his daughter right in front of his eyes, and a little girl who finally found the place she always deserved, center frame in her father's life. If this story touched you, tell me in the comments which part moved you the most. Make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories that will break your heart and then rebuild it. Until next time, take care of yourself, love your family, and remember, no child should ever have to earn their place.